Welcome to Mindshift. I'm Brandon, and today I have another Saturday short for you. This is exactly why I wanted to have a Saturday short section to address the kind of video I'm going to show you today. It's not one that I want to spend 30 minutes talking about, but it is something I want to bring attention to and something that I'd like to address. And so this is perfect. Now, the other reason I chose to have a very short video today is because I needed some editing time back for the video that comes out tomorrow. I'm going to make a request right now of everyone that sees today's video to please watch tomorrow's video. Watch it as long as you can, comment on it, share it, etc. It's a video I've worked really hard on, and it's all about the best way to come out as an atheist. I give 7 tips or principles that I think will make it the most beneficial experience for them versus the horrendous things that can happen if it's not handled with care. That is the kind of video that is the main aim of my channel, is helping people that were like me mitigate some of the harm that I've had to deal with. So again, any attention you can give that tomorrow, it comes out at 9 a.m. Central Time, would be great. Today's video will be short, and it's something that I think is very interesting to talk about. And so to get into it, I'm first going to play you this clip. It's under a minute, don't worry.
How is it that it is morally acceptable to avoid a pregnancy with natural family planning, but not by using a condom? The intention of both is to avoid a pregnancy. Okay, what is the big difference then between sterilizing the act yourself and just waiting till it's naturally infertile? And my typical response to that over the years has been, oh, come on, what is the big difference between killing grandma and just waiting till she dies naturally? End result is the same thing, grandma's dead. Yes, but there's a serious moral difference between killing grandma and waiting till she dies naturally, right? One is a serious sin called murder, and the other is an act of God.
All right, so we're talking about birth control, which is why you can see I didn't want to talk about this for 30 minutes. I also don't want this to bleed over into when does life start, because that's kind of the point he's making here. I think there's a whole lot to say on that subject, and I do talk about it more in my abortion video if you haven't watched that. But for today's purposes, what I'm wanting to address is another aspect of harm that comes from the Christian belief. I'm going to give you some real world examples of how that harm plays itself out today. But first, I think we should address, why do people believe this, right? He is saying that it is a sin to use contraceptives because it's murder. At least that's the analogy that he's trying to make with waiting for grandma to die versus killing her, which is a false analogy. Even the best evidence that life begins at conception is because you have 2 DNA coming together to form a unique DNA. Attributing life further back to just the sperm itself, I think the Bible doesn't even say so. There's one verse and one verse only where you're getting this from. Now, there's some other verses about women's value being tied to reproducing and about our mission is to be fruitful and multiply. And so then purposely doing the opposite of that could be considered a sin, right? Like there's those arguments to be made, but the main one comes from Genesis 38 verses 8 through 10, I think. Let me read it to you. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother." But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. So this is kind of a fun verse just to talk about because it's so ridiculous in general. Like, I love that marriage and sex is this holy special thing and Christians want to protect it, and that's why we can't allow gay marriage, etc. See my video. But meanwhile, you have the God of the Old Testament by Levitical law forcing people that if someone's brother dies, you have to then go have sex almost immediately with his mourning wife, because it is your duty to help him fulfill his offspring duty to God. And by this verse, we can tell it's not just let's try one time. You try until you get it right. He went into her multiple times, and each time he spilled his seed on purpose, and so God struck him dead. So back to our cherry picking here, the idea that so many people are against contraceptives based off this verse alone, or the mental gymnastics of other verses about the importance of producing, which is different, right? Like, that's a positive claim. You should go reproduce. Nowhere in the Bible does it say if you choose not to have children, God's going to kill you. And we see that God doesn't just kill people who don't have children. He killed Onan, though. So did he kill Onan for his own form of birth control? No. They don't even get it right. He killed Onan because Onan broke a Levitical law. That's it. You disobey God, you die. He had a duty to impregnate his sister-in-law. He did not fulfill that duty, so he died. If the duty had been to give her a certain kind of loaf of bread and he didn't, he would have died. We just talked about this in my Leviticus episode on Thursday, there were all kinds of laws. We saw Aaron's 2 sons die because they used the wrong kind of fire at the ceremony for the tabernacle. So this isn't to do with God's view on contraceptives. It's to do with Old Testament commandments being punishable by death. I also think it's hilarious that the Christian or the Catholic or the Protestant, whomever believes this kind of thing, and I would say on average Catholics believe it or push it on others more, that they're fine with. And what this gentleman is mentioning here is natural family planning, which means only having intercourse when the woman is not ovulating, right? Tracking her cycles and having sex appropriately, which that's how you know that if they're okay with that loophole, they're not getting this idea from some New Testament verse about our responsibility to be breeders, because they're fine avoiding it as long as they think it's natural avoidance. It is such a silly line in the sand to draw, but the real world implications of it are horrendous. There are women in their own marriage that are essentially treated as breeders, that despite how many kids they want to have, their husband, who they can't deny sex to except in times of prayer or fasting, but also believes that they shouldn't be using contraceptives, just forces her to be in a constant state of pregnancy, bringing more kids into the world than they can handle. I'll give you a personal example, and then we'll talk about a not personal example. The personal example is growing up, as many of you know, my family were missionaries, and we had all kinds of missionary friends. And we had this one family friend, and they were street preacher evangelist, and they lived in a van. They felt they were called to live in it was like an RV camper, and they didn't believe in contraceptives. I remember even my most fundamentalist mother explaining to me how ridiculous it was that they had these friends who were real nut jobs. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. Anyways, when I was still a child, they would come and they would park in the field by our house, and they had all daughters, 12 daughters. And I don't know what was going on now. The last time I saw them, they had 12 daughters and they were pregnant and they didn't know what their 13th was going to be. And they all lived in this RV. It was like these tiny little bunk beds, and they just traveled around the nation for years on end preaching. That's it. I think that's almost tantamount to child abuse. Now, I'm sure they love their children. I'm sure that they tried to provide the best that they could. They homeschooled their children. So I'm not making a personal judgment on child abuse for them and their individual family. I'm saying for people that do this and don't have the resources to adequately feed, clothe, educate, or protect that amount of children, that's child abuse. It's not okay, and it does happen, and it happens more frequently than you think. You can look up the stats yourself. Atypical amounts of children for the sole sake of religious without considering earning capability. On a grander scale, one of the things that just bugs me the most, and I've come to this awareness after my deconversion, because all of a sudden I thought, wait a second, I still want to give money and help people less fortunate than me, and I've always given through the church. How should I give now? And it led me down this rabbit hole of effective altruism, and yes, it has its issues, but generally speaking, there's some good things there. And I started being more careful with where I gave. And some of the specifically Catholic ministries and Catholic charities that many people give their money to, they spend a lot of that money preaching instead of just helping. And you look at the big mission outreach of Catholic charity in Africa. For example, 150,000 children are born every single year already with HIV. If you're a Catholic missionary, you think that that might be the first thing you want to help address. Nope. You want to hand out Bibles and you want to tell these people that contraceptives are wrong. If that is your form of morality, if that is how you care about other people and you want to go and help this area that is lost, it's just to preach the good news of Christ to them and tell them how sinful it is for them to use contraceptives instead of, using some of that money to provide them condoms, meeting an actual physical need for these people. I see this all the time in the comments on my own channel. Well, Brandon, you have to understand, God didn't care to break our physical bondage. He came to break our spiritual bondage, don't you know? No, I don't know. God came to do supposedly about 1 billion things, like make sure that you impregnate your mourning sister-in-law by essentially what I would say is rape over and over, because I'm sure she didn't want that. That's what God wants. That and 1 billion other horrendous things. So, this is quick. This is simple. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I think the point that I'm wanting to make with this is that as Christians, can you at least be consistent in how you utilize the scriptures? If you say that the reason contraceptives are a sin is because God gave us a calling, then don't use loopholes like natural family planning. If you say that contraceptives are obviously a sin against God because of the example of Onan in the Bible, then stop eating pork or shrimp or wearing mixed fabrics or getting tattoos, because it comes from the same Levitical laws that have to do with why Onan was punished for this. If you're going to demand that people look at context when they use verses, then look at the context of this verse and stop making horrendous real-world negative outcomes that hurt people both here and afar, whether it's the children of people having too many children that can't support them, or the wife that is just forced pregnancy after pregnancy, or the groups of people that have HIV, because the missionaries that are taking the time to use the charitable money that was given to helping these people would rather proselytize and judge than provide basic medical support. That's my Saturday short. Thanks for watching. Again, please tune in tomorrow. And until next time, keep thinking.